Awesome, y'all. Thank you for joining us here during the Right Hive Conference 2026. And we're talking today about a matter of perception, distance in POVs. We're going to talk about all the different POV controversies, the different ways that you can look at stories, the different ways you can write stories and insert your reader into them. We have a great panel today, a great slate, let's say, absolutely. First off, if I may introduce Kionna LeMalle, author of Behind the Waterline, released last year. What are you working on these days, Kionna?
I'm actually working on another historical fiction novel that is really tracing some intergenerational stories, tracing several mothers. So I always have a working title. They don't necessarily stick, but the working title is Mama, and it's really looking at a mother who had to give up a child through a forced adoption and how that story unfolds across generations.
Yes, the ripples of it down through there, absolutely.
Yes.
And fitting with a water line as well in your previous novel. Heck yeah. Moniza Hossain, no, so happy to have you here as well. Author of Bad Things Happen Here, releasing this year. What are you working on these days, Moniza?
I'm working on a YA novel about vampires. It doesn't have a title yet, but it's got some cool stuff in it, some reincarnation, some mythology from South Asian culture. It's very interesting.
Great, absolutely, heck yeah. Awesome. Then we're on to Hien Nguyen, absolutely, author of Twin Tides, her YA novel. Lovely to have you here. Oh my, Hien, what are you working on these days?
So I'm working on a YA project that I'm calling My Mean Girls, but if they were a witch coven that does human sacrifice. And then I'm also working on adult fantasy that is based out of dynastic Vietnam. There's a necromancer Rapunzel. So those are my two big projects on the desk right now.
Oh no, does hair and nails really grow after you've died? The necromancer will find out, absolutely. Very cool. And absolutely finally we have Brenda. Brenda, I don't see your last name on here, so please mention it when you come on Brenda, author of Bruja's Nest, which is releasing this October.
Thank you, Sean. I'm Brenda LaTorre, and I'm working on a gastro horror novel about a woman searching for the best food ingredients.
Oh, fun. Absolutely. I do love the interplay between the different things that people are working on. There's lots of memory, there's lots of thoughts, there's lots of family things going on. Absolutely. And there's a lot of different perspectives for sure. So, Brenda, if I can start with you, let's kind of define some of these. So, what's the difference between like a third person omniscient and a third person close to you?
So I think the third person omniscient follows everyone, what everyone is thinking, as opposed to a closer perspective where even though it's written in the third person, you just follow the thoughts and actions of that one, like the protagonist usually.
Fitting into their head a lot more.
Right.
Absolutely. Heck yeah, absolutely. Moniza, have you ever written in second person? And do you just want to give the viewers, kind of idea of what writing in second person is like?
So second person is where you use you. So like you walked out the door and then you saw him. And I have never written in second person, and it's extremely unlikely that I ever would because it's a very challenging point of view to write in for a number of reasons. One is it can feel very oppressive to the reader because it's almost like you're telling the reader what they're doing, and that can feel really, really a kind of excessive if you're reading an entire novel written in that style. So it takes a very gifted, I think, writer to pull that off. And I don't know if I'm there yet. Yeah.
You're right, extremely rare, but absolutely. But still gotta hit all the different ones for sure. And Kionna, if I can ask, what is first person? If you can just give people kind of an overview of that. And do you write in first person?
Yes, first person is probably one of the easier forms to write in some ways, but it has its limitations, which can make writing more difficult. It is when you're in the head of a character, but that character is also the one telling the story, right? So the character is also the story's narrator in first person. And so it is the limited perspective of that character. You can only write in that story what that character is able to reveal. And it has to be logical that the character would know that information, would be able to recall it, would have overheard it, would have uncovered it. And so you've got to find ways to maintain logic and coherency while writing in a very limited point of view. It actually turns out that Behind the Waterline is written in first person. So that's why I laughed a little when you asked that question because it was not written in first person initially, but its final version is written in first person. And we can get into a little bit more of that later.
We'll get into editing later. I
Yes.
so want to pick your brain about this now. Absolutely. And Hien, with those three different perspectives, which one is your favorite and why do you like writing in it?
So I tend to start in third person close. My novel Twin Tides has three point of view. Two are in third person close, the two sisters, and then there is a first person ghost. And the reason why the ghost is in first person is because I wanted to elevate that ethereal, non-human quality. So that's why they speak from a different voice. And actually, they started out as second person, but through the editorial process, changed it. And what Moniza said is right. It's very always accusatory, right? The reader's like, why? I'm not doing this. What am I? And you get a little bit of that with first, but I do think readers are a little bit more used to it. I do appreciate the distance that third gives you, right? There's a little bit more space to kind of play with the choreography. As Kionna was saying, first person, theoretically, the person knows everything, right? And so there are certain things that they wouldn't necessarily narrate, right? Because why would you narrate something if you're living it versus in third? So I do find third gives me a little bit more wiggle room, but I do find first person perspectives, when done really well, really exciting. And personally, I struggle with doing first person multi POV. So if I have multi, I'm almost always picking third because I'm just like, I can refer to them by name, no one's confused.
Yay! Oh no, absolutely. And with multi POVs, that opens up a whole different bag of worms for sure. But love how you guys have described how kind of similar close third person and first person is. And in that respect, like there's only certain things that this character can know. Most novels tend to be written this way. Older novels sometimes are a lot more omniscient. Second person is more of a thought experiment typically, but I love that example again of talking about a ghost because then you have this ethereal being and they're breaking into the story. Even if you didn't end up using it, I love that as an example of like where you might use second person in a longer work in a novel as opposed to oh my like an entire 100 pages of like you. Yeah, that would be pretty difficult for sure. If I can ask, maybe let's go to Moniza here. Was there a formative novel that kind of like inspired you to writing? And what POV was it written in?
That's such an interesting question. So, my book, Bad Things Happened Here, is obviously horror, and the formative novels that kind of shaped me as a writer are Stephen King novels. That's what I read when I was a kid. I also read like Goosebumps and all that because I write middle grade. But, when I was growing up, I think most of us did read like books for adults. And Stephen King writes a variety of different point of views. He writes a close third person, which is very aligned to a character and extremely immersed in that character to the point where it's almost like a first person and you get a lot of sensory details. And he does that extraordinarily well, which is good for horror. And then he also does first person, which is obviously also good because first person is immediately very immersive. I think the difference between first person and third person is that with first person, you have to kind of sound like the character a lot more because you're speaking as the character. So there's the pressure to kind of like be more voicey. And Stephen King does that very well. Unfortunately, when you're writing for kids, that can become very limiting because then you're also limited to the vocabulary that a child would have. So my book is about a 12-year-old, and if I wrote the story entirely with the language of a 12-year-old, while that can be very compelling, that immediately limits like the amount of descriptions I can get away with. So with all of that in mind, I tend to prefer third person and third person close for all of those reasons, because it allows me to be immersed in the character while still allowing me enough of a distance that I can be a little bit more literary, more lyrical when I need to be. Yeah. So
And to
yeah,
be
Stephen King
voicey,
was a big
like I love that that's your
and be
influence.
voicey.
Not to be voicey. Yes. Heck yeah.
Yeah.
I do hope that question inspires people and has, like maybe some ideas bubbling up. Brenda, do you have a formative novel, and what POV was it written in?
Yes, I as a kid I really loved a series of unfortunate events. And it's a very interesting point of view because there's like this narrator, so it's written in third person, kind of like omniscient, but it's also sort of meta. So the author sometimes gives opinions and talks like about himself. So it was very interesting. That's not how Brujas Nest is written, but I hope I can do something like that someday. And it is like he inspired me to read more and write in general.
Yeah, heck yeah. My Kiana, do you have
Yes, sir.
a formative book like that? My and what POV was it in?
Yes, actually, I would say it's Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry,
Oh, I love
by
that book.
Mildred Taylor. Yes, I love that entire Logan family saga. And I think through her writing is where I really fell in love with story and with the power of what story can do. Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry is written in first person in Cassie Logan's voice. And yeah, she does a great job of staying inside of the mind of this 10-year-old who's um, experiencing as well as witnessing some things that are extremely challenging socially and emotionally. And as a kid reading that, I remember connecting on a very intimate level with that character, and also sort of processing what was happening in the world around me and how much I paid attention to, you know, social matters and political matters and tensions that may have been, affecting my family and community dynamics. So I hadn't I hadn't intended to write in first person when I, wrote Behind the Waterline, but I do think that ultimately, though, of course, there's been lots of reading since childhood, those formative novels, have left such a deep footprint. So I think there's definitely some Mildred Taylor influence there.
It's never one to one, but I love that you're like, oh, actually, it was written pretty similarly. That's very fun. My and Hien, if I can present the question to you as well.
One of my early books I got so into was the Song of the Lioness series by Tamora Pierce, following Alana, and it's close third. And I think because it follows her from childhood to womanhood, and I'll speak to the intersection of like market with writing with point of view, because I think when Tamora originally wrote it, it was written as a very long adult fantasy project. And then through, I don't know if it was her agent or editor, it eventually got conceived as a young adult or a children's series in much shorter fashion. And I think at that time, SFF was almost entirely third person. I attended a talk recently by the author Kate Elliott, who was talking about how first person used to be like literary fiction. Literary did this and not genre. And now that's completely changed, right? And so it's interesting reading that book and feeling so compelled by the POV. I think the third close allowed you to be close to Alana, but as Moniza said, as she was growing from girlhood to adulthood, gave the author enough distance to make that a really compelling arc. And it does make me think, if that was published now, would it be written in verse, right? How would the market dictate how that would have been written? And I'm very curious, but
That's a great answer. I love it. It's a bridge to my next question. So I'm not changing the screen. I am coming right back to you, Hien, with this, which is, do you feel like, I over, let's say, the last decade or so, there has been a change between third person close and first person. And you talked a little about market factors. You talked a little about age appropriateness. What do you think the factors are to see this change? And do you see it, as well? That do you even see it at all? That more authors seem to be writing in first person versus third.
I definitely think so, especially as a writer who, for better or worse, we have to position our book. So you figure out comp titles. And I love omniscient third, especially in SFF, but it's becoming much less common, right? As people want more immediacy, closer POV. And especially with YA, first person dominates, right? Because, the teen reader wants to be in the character's shoes. And I think, definitely see those shifts. And it's not, if you write outside of what the trend is, that's perfectly fine, right? And can be a really compelling story. But you definitely see, oh, if the majority of stories are being told in this way, you do feel the pressure to, oh, should I kind of reshape the story to fit that? Something I do miss, and I'm sure there are more modern novels that do it, is kind of the meta third omniscient with like Lord of the Rings, where you're being told the story in third person, but there is, some other person who's like, I found this manuscript and I'm telling you the story. And I feel like that's definitely fallen out of favor, but I do love that. I do wish that we maybe could return a little bit to more of that. But again, we'll see how things fluctuate with storytelling.
Stories wrapped in stories. I'm gonna find a reference. Absolutely. Heck yeah. Brenda, do you see this trend happening, between first and third, and do you have any opinions on it?
Yes, I definitely see a trend toward first person. However, I feel like when some authors do something different, it's like very refreshing. And so sometimes that's why, well, in part of why their book succeeds. I'm thinking especially like in terms of horror. For example, The Only Good Indians by Stephen Graham Jones. I mean, it has a lot of awesome things other than the point of view, but it shifts between first person and second. And so the monster talks to the reader in second person. And I thought that was like very original and very clever, and it like sets the book apart.
Yeah, no, that's very different. Absolutely. I to hear second person in any, widely released novel, very rare for sure. Kionna, can I ask, as a first person devotee, have you seen that people are coming this way? And do you feel, this stronger connection, I guess, with first person versus third?
Actually, I wouldn't say that I'm devoted to first person. I think each writing project is its own problem to solve, and the story has to be told in a point of view that works for the narrative. Sometimes when we start drafting, we're not yet sure which point of view is the best point of view. Um, I would say that I have noticed more adult fiction written in first person. As Brenda mentioned, first person has long been a thing for children's literature and YA. That's typically almost always YA and children's literature would be written in first person. But I think we are beginning to see more of that for adult literature. And I was just thinking a moment ago that I I just finished reading Ken by Tayari Jones last week or so, and it has two first person narrators. For the weight of what the book is, it feels like it's a book that, had it been written 7 or 8 years ago would have probably been in third person limited, even with two narrative voices. So I think that's one example of how we see more, adult fiction making its way to first person.
Hey, thank you. That's a great example. And as you said, like it's heavier. And so maybe this is, an interesting way of presenting it for sure. Moniza, let me present it to you in this way, because as Kiana mentioned, first person is quite often used in middle grade, YA, stuff like that. Do you have any opinion on first versus third in terms of is this not infantilizing, but pulling down the perspective? Is there a perspective change in age difference between first and third, and is that being shown in the market, do you feel?
I don't know if I necessarily agree with that because I do think that YA, there is a lot of first person. That's become very, very common now because I think YA readers really like the immediacy of the first person point of view. But with middle grade, I think third person is still very much the more regularly used point of view. And usually it's third person that is closely aligned with a particular character. But even then, you still get some books that are written with an omniscient narrator or even an intrusive narrator. Like, for example, the series of unfortunate events. That's a really old book. But we still in children's books, we can still get away with doing that sort of intrusive narration that is kind of not really fashionable so much for adults or even for YA. So I do think that for children, at least, third person is very, very in middle grade is still very popular. It also just allows you to use a wider variety of words because if you are writing in the voice of a child, it really limits your vocabulary and what you can get away with using convincingly without
E- Even if you're
disturbing your
writing an
readers.
adult novel, if you're writing an adult novel and you have a first person character that is a child or a teenager, that's going to limit it, absolutely. That's a great point.
Exactly. Yeah. It's
Yeah.
something you always have to think about when you're writing for children. Like what sounds convincingly like a child.
Yay. So let me open it up and feel free to raise hand physically or, with the little button thing. But if you guys have any opinion on, the editing process, have you changed from first to third or as somebody mentioned, changed from second to first? And how was that process? We're talking to aspiring writers here. How was that process? Was it difficult? Do you advocate for it, and what was the point that you saw that, oh no, this needs to change?
Sure, I'll kick it off since I did mention earlier that the point of view, I did end up changing the point of view for Behind the Waterline. So the novel is really about a grandmother's trauma and how that trauma silences her, like the impact and the danger of not passing on our stories to the next generation. And so when I initially started writing this story, I was writing in third person, largely through the eyes of the grandmother. And one of the things that kept happening was because this particular character was actually struggling with PTSD and she had secrets, there were things that she didn't want to share. I had to keep compromising her as a character to move the story forward. And so that doesn't work. That means that I'm not writing with integrity. So I attempted, after realizing that wasn't quite working, to bring in the grandson's voice. And I try alternating between third person from the grandmother's point of view, using third person limited, and first person from the grandson's point of view. And what happened over time was that the grandmother got increasingly silent and the grandson's voice became boisterous. Like he had the teen angst and he had the attitude and the frustration with how her paranoia impacted him. And so just through that process of working through the story and getting to know the characters better and trying really hard to stay true to who the characters are and what their backstory is and the things that sort of shape their worldview, their fears, their tendencies, their nuances. I ended up landing on she's not willing to say enough for me to write this story in third person and actually be truthful. So with that in mind, I transitioned the story over to first. It meant that I lost probably 80 pages of content at that point. And I think that's one of the things that, aspiring writers, especially if you're really close to
Oh, they say
like
kill your darlings.
traditional
They say
schooling, it's
it.
like, you know, all of us to become the writers that we're becoming, and I'm going to say becoming, right? Because we're all still growing and learning. We had to bury a lot of stuff that we were taught in school, right? The way you're taught in school, it's almost like, you think of it and then it's like crystallized in your mind, and then you write it down at the speed of light and you push it forward and you get a grade, and it's all great. But that's not the artistic process. In the artistic process, we're sometimes stumbling through that thing. We're trying to work it out. We're still trying to figure it out. And we're building a sandbox with all of this information about the characters and the world and the time period and what works and what doesn't work and who are these people really. And sometimes 50 pages in, you learn something about a character that changes everything. So I was because I had been alternating, I was maybe like 120 pages in when I realized, yeah, her content's not getting me anywhere. Like it was just coming kind of to a halt. And so write short stories from her perspective. I don't know. And I had to essentially go almost to ground zero and start to write that story over. It was terrifying. It was painful. I remember the day I shared a new beginning with a friend, and I secretly hoped that they would say no, no, go back, to Ruth's voice. That's the grandmother's name, and they were like, "This is it.
Mm-hmm.
This is it." And I was like, "No, no, no, this this can't be it because if this is it, this means that I have a lot of work to do."
But we were
Um,
talking about community being so important for writers, and I
yes,
love that you have that about getting feedback and whether you like it or not, like that this might be the way to go. I appreciate that.
yes,
Absolutely.
definitely.
Heck yeah. Moniza, you have not muted, and I think you might have something to say on the subject of changing
Oh,
POVs.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize I hadn't muted.
Oh no, I thought you were waiting. I thought you were like, I have something to say about
Oh
changing
no, that was a
POVs and
mistake. I'm
editing
sorry.
them.
I could pitch in. So the only time I've ever really done this, it's not a manuscript that has sold yet, but we're out on sub with it. It's a picture book manuscript, and it's not a change in POV, but it is similar in that it's a change in tense. So it was originally the picture book was written in third person past, which is a very kind of standard point of view. Like that's something that we're all very used to. And I needed to change the tone of the picture book to make it a little bit more lyrical, more kind of like poetic. And I changed it to third person present. And that changed the tone of the manuscript completely and made it so much more lyrical, which is odd. You wouldn't think that, but that's actually, those things can kind of change the way the vibe of the story completely.
Oh, I can see it being much more propulsive. It's happening right
Yeah,
now. Absolutely. Heck yeah.
the
My
immediacy of it.
Brenda, have you ever changed the tense of a novel before?
Yes, yes, I have. Brujas Nest was actually first written in third past as well, and now it's present for first. And yeah, I like to think of my work as Play-Doh. So I love printing out stuff and just cutting it and pasting it with like with
Very
scotch tape.
physical. Yay.
Yeah, I'm very physical and I'll just like scribble around and stuff before rewriting. So it's like not as painful. It's like I see it almost as part of a play that way. Like it helps to to like make getting rid of stuff easier. And so yeah, I wrote it in third past, and some people I gave it to some of my readers, and they were like, the things that are happening feel like slowed down because of the point of view. And I was like, well, I'll see. And so I wrote a chapter in first person. And yeah, I realized it had to be written that way, and I just did it.
So how much did you have to rewrite in that case?
No, everything like 260 pages.
And that's a huge amount. Hien, I know coming to you, you talked about changing tenses before, changing POVs before with you to so I knew I would get an answer out of you, but I hope it wasn't 260 pages.
No, no, it was a much smaller amount of pages, and I have done bigger revisions before. My first project that unfortunately died on submission was a dystopian that did tense shifts and POV shifts, and I rewrote entire acts, kind of experimenting. And, to echo what Kionna said, it sometimes feels really bad to feel like you've lost words, right? But it's been important for me to try to reframe it and think of, okay, I didn't lose words. It helped me learn something about the characters or about what point of view is better. So that has been helpful, even if I end up going, actually, I have to, get rid of all of this. And then, a lot of it does happen in revision where it can be very tedious because find and replace all does not always work, and you have to go back and fix a lot of stuff on a sentence level. So it's going to be painful, but I do think ultimately it always made my project stronger. And again, like if I didn't use it, I still learned something about the character or how this kind of plot point needed to come through on the page.
Sometimes it can be an experiment. Does this work, by changing POV if a story isn't really going anywhere? I love that about saying, like died on submission. And two people who are coming into being an author or aspiring to write a novel, that's not always a bad thing. One, you have practiced, you've done a lot more writing and gotten better at it. And two, if you get a deal, that agent might come and say, so what else do you have? And you might be able to pull that out and, like have something, let's say 80% of the way ready from an earlier point in your career. So you just got that in your back pocket. That's great. Absolutely.
Yeah, I also advise don't actually get rid of stuff. If you cut things, you have that master Word document that has everything and you can always pull from it later. So don't feel like you have to actually throw things out with the dishwater. You can keep it. It just doesn't have to be in that book at that time.
Hey, it can be lore. You can have a lore book. You can have everything on the side. It can turn into short stories. Yes, absolutely. Great point. Heck yeah. I want to bring up a point at this point of talking about TV brain. And I'll toss a link in the chat on the Discord, y'all. TV brain is a concept from an author, Lincoln Michelle, but it's kind of diagnosing what a lot of the internet chatter is about aspiring writers. And essentially, TV brain is when people are looking at other media and then deciding I'm going to be a novelist. Its symptoms can be things like lack of interiority, describing every action in a scene with a flat sense of time, like saying everything as it happens, and repeated repetition of action and metaphor. Do you see in your own work that you have gotten over this? And or do you see new authors, other authors, have limitations like this? Because when we're talking about POV, you really, oftentimes close third, first person want to get into their brain. What do you recommend for authors to like get over the hump of, I really being able to inhabit that person? Brenda, do you have any thoughts on that?
Sure. Especially I think in the horror genre, like it's a genre that is in constant conversation with movies. So often us horror writers consume also like a lot of horror movies too. And it's like in the movies you see all the blood and like the guts and you have all these special effects and sometimes people try to write that in a book and it just doesn't hit the same way. Like you have to use other senses. And I think one of the ways to fight that would be for other people to read your work and to listen to feedback because sometimes you are like you write it down and in your mind like you are picturing the things but then you don't know like if you are actually transmitting those emotions that you want to like for readers to get. So yeah, that would be I think that's what helped me the most because yeah, that definitely happened to me in the beginning. I mean, I've always loved reading books. I think obviously you have to read books to be a novelist. But yeah, I used to think of, oh, I saw this very cool thing in this movie, so that wouldn't that be amazing in a book? And it doesn't work like that. Maybe if you're a screenwriter, but not a novelist.
Absolutely. Heck yeah. Kionna, you had the great example of a formative novel that, was very, very voicey, very first person. Did you have to get over a hump of, learning about interiority, or did you have, some very good, bones about, the things that you liked, in terms of, being able to, get into the interiority of a character?
I think it's really been important for me to spend a lot of time with my characters. There's almost a writerly version of method acting, I guess, right? It's like I have to reach the point at which the characters are with me all day, every day. And so I could be, in fact, I distinctly remember shopping with my mom at one point and coming across, a moo in the store that was like slate blue and had some birds on it. And I remember getting really excited and saying, "Oh my God, Ruth would love this," And Ruth is a
A
character in the
character, yeah,
novel.
yeah.
Yes. And my mom goes, "Who is Ruth?" And I'm like, "Oh, Ruth is, Eric's grandmother. Who is Eric?" Oh, Eric's the character in my novel. And she was really kind of upset with me, okay, because she was like, "How is it you're shopping with me and you're shopping for like fake people, right?" But there's a point at which we know they're fictional, but they're not fake people. They're very real people with real depth and real substance, with real complexity and true drama and hurts and aches. And so that is, I think, the most important thing for combating this is that you have to get beyond just the idea of the story into the space of really knowing the characters. If the characters are not real to us as writers, then our writing's going to fall flat. And for me, that takes time. It takes time before, they begin to consume space in my life outside of my writing time. But when they consume that space, it's when I know that, okay, I'm ready. Like I've arrived and I am now ready to really dig my heels into this particular piece and go all in. But I also want to say that there's no way around the fact that as writers, we have to be reading not only within the genres that we write, but also outside of beyond the genres that we write. And we should be reading both work for recreation and pleasure, but also work that is written well above the level at which we are currently writing, so that we're always stretching ourselves, we're always learning, we're where I want to read work that makes me say out loud, "Oh, I didn't know you could do that." How they make that work, right? Because that's when I'm learning. And that's my biggest word of advice for aspiring writers is read, study, right? Read and study because a lot of people, we are made for stories, right? We're narrative beings. So everyone thinks they have a story to tell, and likely they do have a story to tell, but being able to tell that story well requires developing skill and refining craft. And as a fiction writer, that does not come from watching television. I had the benefit of completing an MFA in a program where there were, we had a fiction cohort and a screenwriting cohort, and occasionally we would come together. We had some classes together, but most classes separately. And one of the things that I learned through those classes that are together is that one, how completely different the art forms are, right? Screenwriters work with a lot of white space. When they're developing a scene, they may be including that scene the one or two items that are important in that scene. And then there's others that come into that creative work and develop the rest of the scene. And they just make sure that the one or two things that were important to the screenwriter are there. But the other thing that screenwriters do that we can learn from, right? Because as a novelist, we don't have like one or two items in the room. Like often when we move our readers into a space, we're attending to a lot of what's in that space, right? But what screenwriters do very well that I think if we really focus our minds and think about it, we can learn from is they write dialogue that multitasks. One line of dialogue is almost always doing three or four different things. Now, to the average TV viewer, they're not necessarily realizing that because they're not studying it. So I would encourage writers who enjoy television or inspired to write fiction by watching film. I would say pay attention to the dialogue and pay attention particularly to how that dialogue is multitasking and how that multitasking is moving the story forward.
It's just has weight to it. And
Yes.
Kiana, I'll bring this up as well. When you say working with a lot of white space, you mean on the page. They're not filling in
Yes.
a lot of stuff. This is a
Yes.
collaborative thing where someone decides on the set, on the close. That's someone else's job. As a novelist, they're all your jobs.
Our job. Yes.
Yeah. Hien, do you have any thoughts on that? Either getting over the hump of learning to do interiority for your characters, or seeing other authors and running into pitfalls as far as just taking too much other media in.
I do think this is something that really you focus on doing revision, right? You can always add more, you can always take stuff away, but it has to be on the page first. So I'd encourage new writers to maybe not get caught up in your insecurities while you're writing and just write the story. I do feel like we're at this moment, this is a conversation across media, right? Media literacy, people thinking things are overwritten or you're getting kind of punched in the head with a metaphor. And then on the other side are people saying, well, people are getting it, right? They're not getting the theme or the story. And so advice that I really resonate with is to not write towards your least generous reader, so someone who's just going to impose their wrong interpretation no matter what, but also write towards your ideal reader, write towards the person that's going to get what you're saying, get the nuance, and not try to overwrite and just like, well, for the person who's not going to get it, I want to make sure they get it. That's not going to really serve your story. And I think it's unavoidable because I play a lot of video games, which is a different storytelling medium. And there are just all the forums where someone's just completely misread or not gotten a plot point, and it's almost unavoidable, right? There's going to be that person, and you can't maybe accommodate them. You have to write what's true to the story. And in terms of interiority, I think what has helped me, and might not be the most exciting, but a lot of like nonfiction sources, so primary sources from whatever historical event, you can read an account of the same exact event from two different perspectives, and they have a very different interpretation based on their social class, who they wore, what their gender was. And so, I don't know, sometimes just revisiting nonfiction texts also is helpful to kind of ground myself in this is what humans act like. This is how humans interpret the exact same thing in very different ways. And that helps me at least develop characters that feel real, right? That feel like they're misinterpreting things in a way that makes sense for them as humans and for the story.
Unreliable narrators. Absolutely. You're right there. Heck yeah. Don't be scared of unreliable narrators. Moniza, working with picture books. So you're working with illustrators. Writing in middle grade, maybe writing YA as well. Do you find that these perspectives, these changes happen? And how do you feel about, like really fleshing out a scene?
That's so interesting that you'd say that because I remember Kiana talked about the white space in films and picture books. There is that white space as well because you're not just telling the entire story yourself. You're working with an illustrator, so the written part has to work in tandem with the pictures. And if you explain too much and you describe too many visual things, then you're really taking away from the illustrator's job. So that's actually a completely different skill set. And it's a very unique one that you have to develop if you write picture books. And it's so very different from when you're writing novels, because then you have to create this sensory landscape on your own that's both visual and it has all the other senses in it. And it's just two different things. With picture books, yeah, I mean it is interesting. You kind of learn to just let the artist do the visual stuff, and then you kind of like focus on the other parts of the story, the other senses. With novels, when I'm writing middle grade, something that I had to learn to do is there is I liked what Hien said about not writing to your least generous reader. And that's such an interesting thing to keep in mind because when you're writing for children, there is the tendency to write towards your maybe your least attentive reader, the reader who is least interested in reading your book, who's being forced to read your book maybe. And I did that a lot when I was writing my book because I was so worried about taking up too much space, too many words. I didn't want to bore my reader, so I cut out a lot of interiority, and it worked to the detriment of the story. So when I was editing the book, what I ended up doing with my editor is I then ended up putting the interiority back in because a reader will be compelled if they can relate to your character. So if you can make your character feel like a real person by delving into their thoughts, their emotions, a child, regardless of what their attention span might be, if they feel like this is their friend whose story they're invested in, they're going to want to read those thoughts as well because they care about the character. And that's something that I really had to force myself to kind of believe because, yeah, I mean, I was worried I was taking too many words. The story needs to be shorter, but it made the character more believable, which is ultimately more attractive to a reader. Yeah.
Yay. I appreciate that very much. Absolutely. And I love that y'all, I'm talking with all sorts of different authors that have different viewpoints on it. We're getting all the POVs here, all the POVs from all the authors that are working in different ways. Um, let's go back to stories that really influenced you as well. Maybe Brenda, I can start with this question and say, uh, classic stories, they often had a different POV. We're talking about the fashion today of going towards first person, but an older story, you go back to Pride and Prejudice, yada yada, you're gonna have a very different perspective, POV. Are there any classic novels that you love the POV that they did that is maybe out of fashion now? And what, it doesn't have to be that one. What POV would you like to see come more into fashion?
I guess as others mentioned, I think it depends. It really depends on each novel. I don't think yeah, I guess maybe more books with a mini stand would be interesting, but sometimes, that ends up in head hopping, so it's really it's complicated, so I'm not sure. I mean, I really like classic literature. I love Great Expectations, which has like this omniscient point of view. And so we see like what happens in everyone's head, and uh despite that, like the plot twist works really well. So I do like how Dickens did that, but I don't know. Like I don't have like a specific preference. I'm interested in good books.
That's great. Absolutely. All my being like, hey, leave it as is. Bruja's Nest is written in a first person, a close third. Like, let's leave it at this. We don't need to go back to omniscient. I'm not going to rewrite it again. My let's say this. Hien, I did catch that reference I was thinking of. My Neva and stories like When the Tiger Came Down the Mountain. Stories wrapped inside of stories. So that was one reference that I was thinking of, and very mythological. But do you have a, kind of POV that's fallen out of fashion that you like, that maybe you'd like to see come back, or a different, POV that you would like to see become ascendant?
I'm only going to keep adding to that example because the other one that I love is The Little Prince, which in many ways I think wouldn't be published now in its current iteration, right? Because it's a children's story, but it is very narrative heavy, but also illustrated and deals very serious topics, but is for children, right? And it's told through the lens of the pilot, right? So you learn the Little Prince is never narrating his own story. It's all through the lens of this old guy who discovers the prince. And I think it works really well for the story. You get it's almost mythological, even though it's not quite, right? You're like hearing this story from this man who's reminiscing, and there's almost a nostalgic aspect to it. But he's essentially telling, right? He's telling you the story the entire time. There is no being in the prince's head, being in his body. And so this question of interiority and immediacy is just different, right? And I would love to see that kind of storytelling return. But it's one of those things I'm like, I don't know if A Little Prince could be published now. But it's one of my favorite books. And so I think it does a lot of things really well and it breaks a lot of rules that writers are told not to do, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's what I mean is, what's this tension? And as time goes on, what do readers want? But hey, authors are allowed to have their own opinions as well. Moniza, do you have an opinion on that? A former POV that was very big that doesn't exist anymore, or another POV you'd like to see get very popular?
I love The Little Prince and I like Great Expectations. And Jane Austen is my favorite writer. So I like all of these books. Do you know what I feel like we have become very prescriptive because publishing is such a huge industry. And as a result, it's so kind of like financial in that they want to buy the books that sell. And as a result, it becomes very prescriptive. And what sells is what readers like to read. Readers like first person. Some of them hate third person to the point where they would refuse to read a book if it's third person. And they won't even try it. And then as a result, they want more first person. I feel like that works to the detriment of just literature, the world, and life. Like just saddens me because I feel like if a story requires a third person omniscient and you're able to do something fun, like in Jane Austen's case, she had this wry kind of like sardonic, knowing narrator who was an intrusive narrator who is not necessarily Jane Austen herself, but is this kind of like hilarious woman who's kind of commenting on what's happening. Or, my favorite novel is Middlemarch. Again, I like to describe Middlemarch as it's like watching a soap opera, but like with your smartest friend who has these very wise ideas. So you're listening to someone tell you the story who's really clever and who's kind of reflecting on it in a very wise way. Now, these are not books we could publish now. Like, no one would allow this. And I just think that's sad. We don't need all books to be like that, but we should at least get to have some books that are like that. Yeah, I'm sorry, I'll get off my soapbox
Oh
now,
no,
but
you're
yeah, it
good.
makes
There
me
are
sad.
so many books being published. Why can't we have a greater diversity of POVs?
Yes,
Absolutely.
exactly. In genre fiction, like maybe you could get away with it in literary fiction, but we should be allowed to do some weird stuff in genre fiction as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Kiana, do you have any opinion on the subject?
Yes, the book that comes to mind when I think of classic novels with point of views that just struck a chord, with me. And yeah, I could name many, but I'm going to go with Madame Bovary
Hmm.
by Flaubert. And it's just magnificently written, right? And so it's third person omniscient, but there's this very fluid use of free and direct style. So we don't have all of these, authorial tags, he thought, he wondered, she remembered. There's a trusting of the reader to do the hard work of following the story and and really entering, the story with the author. Um, I think while we do have some work that's, still written in third person omniscient today, it's a lot more watered down than Flaubert, right? There's a lot of sectioning off of, perspective. It's like, when there's a new chapter for a new perspective, there's more, author tags to cue the reader in that we're now entering this person's head. And Flaubert was just, really a master for making those shifts very subtly, using other senses, and sort of bringing the reader into what that character is seeing or smelling and then slipping right into the character's head. I think it is an absolutely beautiful way to write. Um, I don't I don't know. I wouldn't say and I hope that we're not at a point where such work would not be published today. But I think it's a lot harder um, because unfortunately there is, as has been mentioned, a lot of pressure within the industry and a lot of simplifying the literature, as if we write the literature in a way that is too complex, the readers will not go with us. And I don't think that's true. I think if we write good stories, even if they are complex, that the readers will, in fact, go with us. I think that people are a lot more thirsty for slowing down than we give people credit for. A lot of us are pretty exhausted by the fast pace of everything. I do wish we had more work, that was more, the norm than what we're seeing now, where sometimes it feels like we're almost being asked in some ways to spoon feed our readers. And I don't think that's healthy for us as a society. And I don't think that it is conducive to us, I guess, elevating, right? Like language elevates us. And I worry a little bit sometimes about that.
Oh, you're perfectly fine to have your worry. Absolutely. I understand. I'm always a big advocate for breaking down the barrier between literary and genre. Our genre should allow to be complicated. Our literary, aka our humdrum existence, should allow it to be simple and easy. And the one thing I do find, and it's not exactly what you mean, is cozy. Cozy is kind of fun where it's like be slow, low stakes, and it can be a really fun story. It does not need to change the world. Absolutely. Um, okay, so we're coming to the end here, and I do want to ask one fun question right there. Which is if your life story was written, what POV would it be in? Brenda, I see a smile. I do see a smile. Is it second person?
Yes. I think that would be like a lot of fun. And to be like, I know you are looking at me right now, and you know I'm dead. And
Oh, just so difficult. You're not making it easy
yeah,
for the reader at all.
I'd love that.
Hien, do you have an answer for that? What would your life story be written in?
I'm of two minds, and one way I agree with Brenda, and like you would be kind of fun. I'm like, you need to experience my embarrassment firsthand. On the other side, that might be too personal. I might just want third. I'm like, I don't need you that up in my life story. That might be too intimate for me.
All right. Kiana, do you have thoughts on that? What would your own life story be in? Written in?
Yeah, before you ask that question, it's something I have not thought about. Um, Honestly, I think I'm with him. I think I would write it in third, like a close third, using a lot of free and direct style. And I'd probably write it as fiction so I could say all the taboo things that, have maybe been in my head that maybe wouldn't be well received.
It's
So that
interiority.
way,
Absolutely.
yes, that way I don't have to hold back, but I could actually, tell my story.
And Moniza, let me give you the last word on that.
This is my life is so boring. No one would want to read this, but I think it would be hilarious if my life was narrated by like Jane Austen at her bitchiest. So like a really bitchy, mean, sardonic kind of like third person omniscient intrusive narrator, just kind of like being very horrible about me. So that might be fun. That might be fun to read.
It's very first person, but still you're reminding me of that British show where the character is constantly breaking the fourth wall and is, always just so self-deprecating about everything. I'm gonna forget the name. I'll toss it in the chat if I remember it, guys. Absolutely. Thank you all so much for joining me for a matter of distance and a discussion of POVs. Like I said earlier, you guys have really covered all the bases here so much. Absolutely. I really appreciate this conversation.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.
Thank
Heck yeah.
you.
Well, y'all enjoy the rest of Right Hive conference. I'm sure there's things before and after this, absolutely. And thank you once again for joining us at this free and kind of crowdsourced conference that is one of my highlights every year. Absolutely. Thanks, y'all.